Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Let's Talk with me, Jeremy Leon, and as always, a guest on my show. Tonight, I have someone very interesting. I saw recently an interview with him and Conscious Caracal on Conscious Caracal's YouTube channel, which I have left a link to that in the description below. He wrote an article called The Eternal Apartheid. Very interesting indeed. I've also left a link to that in the description below. This man sounds very interesting. He's also Portuguese, which makes him even more interesting. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Quentin Ferreira. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly.
That's perfect, Joe. Thanks so much for the invite and for the lovely welcome. Wow. I hope now to live up to the high expectations of being interesting that you've put before me. So, yeah, thanks very much, man.
No worries. All right. So, actually, this is the first time you've been on my show. So, very quickly, just tell us a bit about yourself, what you do for a living, where you were born, where you live now, all that stuff.
Okay. So, my name is Quentin Ferreira. I was born and grew up in a town called Benoni outside of Johannesburg. East Rand represent. And I studied clinical psychology at the University of Johannesburg. So I qualified and started my internship at Sterkfontein Hospital in 2013. And then from there until the end of 2016, I worked in several hospitals and community clinics throughout the East Rand and Johannesburg. I came to the Netherlands at the end of 2016. A bit of a strange story, but I came to work in the European Space Agency. But a couple of weeks before I was due to move, they had to fill the role urgently. So I basically landed here with nothing. Then eventually they reopened the role that I was supposed to take. So I started off working for a software company that designs software that is used to project manage all sorts of space missions within the European Space Agency and the space industries in Europe. And then towards the end of last year, I started a new role still at the European Space Agency. So now I'm the head of a small team that does information and configuration management support for the Human and Robotics Exploration Division. So like the International Space Station, the Mars missions and stuff is our department. My job is not so cool and fancy. It's very much like a Ford production line. You know, these missions are so huge that a lot of people get very circumscribed and very like production line-ish type of jobs. Okay. So we manage all the information coordination between the European Space Agency and industry and configuring the software that's used to project manage and review all the designs and stuff like that.
Cool. That is fascinating. So they accepted your psychology degree?
Yeah, actually, I had to do a small IT course to be able to take the first job I did. But from there, I really learned how to use the systems and the software pretty well. And they were like, yeah, well, I've got on-the-job sort of training. So they accepted me with that.
Cool.
And so actually, that's the reason I don't practice psychology anymore. It's because my qualification is valid in the Netherlands. Yeah. But because of the way their health system is set up, if I was to charge people, they'd have to pay me cash. And they have like no universal healthcare here. It's a health insurance system, so everyone pays health insurance. So no one wants to pay cash for psychotherapy. And I have to do a whole bunch of stuff to register with the Dutch system, which I have to like stop working for a number of months and go to classes. So I can't really afford to do that. So now I don't practice.
Fair enough, man. How long have you been in the Netherlands now?
It's 3.5 years now.
3.5 years. Okay, so you recently left because there was something interesting I wanted to ask you, because a lot of people let me first go back a bit. For those of you who don't know, Quentin did write a very fascinating article called The Eternal Apartheid. Am I correct? That's the title.
Yeah.
If I'm mistaken. And we're going to touch on it just a little bit. But like I said, I left a link to the interview where he went into quite a great deal of detail with Conscious Caracal, and there's a link in the description. You guys can go and watch it. I encourage you to go and watch it. It's fascinating stuff. But something that happens quite often, and people, I think, may have asked this during that interview with Conscious Caracal, is even though you're South African, they might ask you like, oh, but why are you writing articles about South Africa when you don't even live here? You know, why are you so concerned with South Africa? What do you say to people who say that?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty silly mentality, if I'm honest with you. First of all, Because I don't live in a place doesn't mean I can't be educated in a place. I did spend 30 years there, and I gained experiences that I think your average middle class South African might not have had from working in township clinics and stuff like that. So if that's your criticism, that's fine. Because I live somewhere now, it doesn't mean I intend to live here permanently. In fact, that's never been my plan. Soon I will make a move somewhere. Might be back to SA, might be to my homeland of Portugal, where my parents and grandparents come from. So I think the world is most people's oyster nowadays. If you can find a job overseas, no one would begrudge you moving. So I say to them, maybe it's a little bit of jealousy, really.
Jealousy, interesting. It could be. It could definitely well be. But again, that article was very interesting, and we'll talk a little bit about it just now, or right now. It's The Eternal Apartheid, a very interesting title to say the least. Now, basically, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm going to try and give a bit of a synopsis. Basically, talking about how we never really got out of apartheid in South Africa. The roles have just been switched. We've traded what we thought a liberal movement was going to happen and get us out of apartheid, and the new rainbow nation of South Africa over the years has actually turned into apartheid in reverse. Things like BEE being implemented, and also the want for economic, what's it called? What's the term I'm looking for?
Radical economic transformation.
Radical economic transformation and EEWC, all taking or trying to be passed through the Constitution and edited with pretty much very little resistance. I mean, there are the organizations that are trying to fight it, the IRR, the RF Reform, and all those guys, and many lawyers as well. But now, you made an interesting analysis on South Africa, and this was over a year ago, about how, things have just mirrored. Am I correct in saying that?
To a degree, I don't want to give the impression that the article was saying that post-apartheid South Africa is just like apartheid South Africa. That's not really what I mean. When I'm talking about the eternal apartheid, basically, I called it the founding myth of post-apartheid South Africa. So what I was really thinking about, or what problem I was really trying to solve with writing that article, I've observed the way we've had conversations about contemporary South Africa after apartheid. And I was always wondering, why do the conversations always proceed in a very stereotyped way, right? So why is everything about this idea that black people and white people's interests are diametrically opposed, right? And I think that's a big lie at the center of this eternal apartheid myth. So why can't we move a conversation past apartheid, number one? Why do we relate to the present South Africa as if it was exactly the same forces at play as the previous South Africa? I mean, a lot of people, and actually you might know of the, what were they called? Bell Pottinger. They came up with that term, white monopoly capital. Now, I've wondered, since the ANC has had political power to the point of hegemony for 26 years, and I mean, they've infiltrated literally every institution in the country, universities, the private sector. I mean, all the state-owned enterprises are filled with ANC cadres, and yet the conversation about the problems in South Africa, it seems as if the power structure hasn't changed, whereas in fact it has. And that's why I said the eternal apartheid is more like a new order that was superimposed on top of the old order. So it kind of brought some chaos into the system to break away the past hierarchy, but it has become a new hierarchy, and yet we still in our minds are somehow conditioned, or the way we speak about and understand South Africa is as if it was still the apartheid. And so what I was trying to convey with the name, the eternal apartheid, is kind of like our history has been memory holed completely, and the revolution was like the birth of the nation, if that makes sense. And now the whole frame of every discussion has to take place within this framework, using the archetypes of the unrepentant white and the perpetually victimized African. So I hope I answered your question with a long sort of answer there.
No, it's a perfect synopsis, which also brings up more questions, actually. So, I mean, I love the fact that you say that it's basically we pretend, or not pretend, but it's we're forced to kind of think that we're in the same apartheid regime, like the whites are still in control and stuff, when actually that
Yeah.
isn't true. And it's interesting. How would you say that has been accomplished? This narrative.
Hmm. Sure. Okay. So in the article, I actually touch on how a meme spreads. So I think just to break it down, at the most basic level, a meme is a gene of cultural evolution, and a meme is just a symbol. So a word can be a meme, right? Or a collection of ideas can be a meme. And so that's why I called it a myth. Like a founding myth is sort of like a meme that a civilization tells itself to connect the past to the present. And so it started off actually from a bottom up level because um, in the struggle against apartheid, revolutionaries, first of all, there was a lot of players at play, and I don't think many people know that anymore. I mean, the ANC sort of just stolen the title of sole authentic representation of black people in South Africa, but there were so many more forces at play in the struggle.
Yeah.
But the sort of chaos that they tried to introduce to challenge the tyrannical hierarchy of apartheid started off with like sort of black consciousness, Steve Biko and the like, and some churches started to challenge and tell a different narrative about oppression. There was also like a Marxist angle where they sort of conscientized the working class. And so from telling these sort of stories and building up these meme plexes, they found a cohesive way to tackle and challenge apartheid. But what can happen with a meme is that it can just spread through repetitive usage. So either it was useful, which it did serve a purpose to challenge the existing power structure during apartheid, but now it's almost been imposed from a top-down level. So while it started off in an emergent way, now it's the narrative that we have to tell. And so that's how it just spread, just through repetitive usage. And we haven't really been able to challenge it, because anytime it has been challenged, all hell pretty much breaks loose, as we can see. And the conversation doesn't move forward. Yes. And that's really what I was observing.
You're right. Every time someone says something, oh, you're racist, oh, you're white privilege,
unrepentant white,
white, and all that. What's your opinion on this? I've seen some videos, and I don't know if you've touched on this in the article, but there's this thing where I've seen videos of young students in UCT and various other institutions that say they're being taught the white history and white maths and white science. What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I know in the universities there's a big move to decolonization. Actually, that was one of the things that really scared me, because I was involved with a couple of universities in Johannesburg, employed as well by universities. And I noticed these kind of conversations. Now, when I was young, I'm not going to lie, I mean, everyone in my department was basically in love with Marx. And all my professors were like, hey, Karl Marx is the shit. And so they made me read Marx. And, when you're young and you have a sort of concern for social justice and you're curious, Marx does actually have a kind of seductive quality. And especially if you look around in South Africa and you see inequality such that it is, and poverty such that it is, you think, wow, there might be some kind of something to what Marx is saying. Of course, they don't teach you about the Soviet Union and what happened in the gulags and stuff like that. You have to really find that out for yourself. But nevertheless, this undercurrent of decolonization and sort of neo-Marxist rhetoric is very strong in the universities. And what I want to say, or what I want to ask people whose lecturers talk about that, I want to ask them, so let's say we deconstruct everything, right? Because apparently, according to some of these theorists, rationality and the empirical method are also tools of white supremacy.
Yes.
So let's start from scratch and decolonize everything. Let's make science fall. Then how do we pursue truth if not through the empirical method? That is really the question I would ask them if they were to say, oh, well, let's deconstruct everything and let's not learn about science, white math, white history. Well, what are your criteria for pursuing truth then? And you'll find they never have an answer for that. It's always deconstructionism. It's never, let's look back and try to reintegrate aspects of our past. And actually, that's what the eternal apartheid prevents us from doing, because we're so stuck in this particular frame. We actually can't go back before apartheid and maybe look at situations in South Africa where black and white people cooperated. And historically, there are quite a number of such instances. Of course, there's instances of conflict as well. But there must be a synthesis of European, Western, African, I think colored Indian culture in South Africa. That synthesis has to take place if things are going to move forward in a good way,
Yes.
in a positive direction. Deconstructionism can't tell us any way to do that. They can only say that everything is, built on a hierarchy of tyranny.
I would say that maybe your article as well was made, and correct me again if I'm wrong, to hopefully red pill some people about what is currently happening in South Africa. Because I've often said this, and you've seen some of the videos I've made and some of my opinions on Twitter and stuff like that. I personally like to think that I'm colorblind. Like, I don't see black, white, brown, I sometimes forget that I am brown. But I've never, ever seen color. And I know this because I used to live in Egypt. Now, in Egypt, it's not there is a type of racism, but I don't know what the right word is. It's not, maybe it's classism, or it's because, again, in Egypt, they're not a racist people. They're very welcoming in their culture. They're very nice to people. They're mean towards other Arabs, which is ironic. So they don't like the Saudi Arabians, or they don't like the Iraqians, or they don't like whatever. But for the most part, they're not that racist. They didn't like Americans, that's for sure. But that's not a race. So I don't know what the right term is. But when I came to South Africa, I didn't even I knew what racism was, obviously from the history books, but I was not racist. I didn't like black people, brown, whatever, doesn't matter. And only in South Africa over the past few years have I felt this hatred that is being spewed out by the media, that is being spewed out by the narrative and even the government. And I'm not saying that it's made me racist, but it makes me sad to see all these people caught up in this whirlwind of white this, black this, white this, black this.
Yeah.
And you got politicians saying kill the Boer and all that stuff. It just makes me sad. And I think what your article is intended to do is, like I said, hopefully bring down those goggles, so to speak, and tell people, hey, look at what's happening. This is not cool. Nobody wants to fight about race. It's being forced in your face, day in, day out, by the media, by government, by everyone around you. But deep down inside, we as human beings, we don't want to fight. I don't want to fight you, Quentin. I mean, I might not.
Yeah.
I have nothing against you, but it doesn't matter whether it's an African man or a Pora or an American. I don't want to fight anyone. I don't want to fight anyone. I want to have a nice conversation with people and have a nice discussion about how we can move things forward. And I guess that leads me to my next question, which is, in your opinion, how do we fix this problem that we have?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think if I had the right answer to that, Joe, I'd help a lot of people and save a lot of people's lives. And I don't know that I have quite the depth of knowledge to sort of find that. But what I will say is that what you described about this constantly bringing things back to race is what I talk about in the Eternal Apartheid. Everything must be reduced to this interplay between the unrepentant white and the perpetually victimized African. And you'll notice that every conversation will be about white privilege, and then there's some kind of redistributive ethic that go along with that. Well, the whites victimize the blacks, so now we have to redistribute wealth, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's sort of neo-Marxist stuff with a bit of race nationalism mixed in. So it really is upsetting. And the real messed up part of this is that, like you, I actually am a non-racialist. It's not that I don't see color, but for me, it doesn't tell me something that important about a person. Like I could only know if I looked at a brown dude like you. I might think, oh, you're a Latino, hablas español, maybe, and
Bene,
and
bene.
and maybe I know maybe I know something about a black guy from another culture based on a sort of stereotype. But really, if I had to sit down with that person, I couldn't judge them based on just knowing their race. However, this sort of non-racial ethic that was apparently part of the ANC when it was founded, and certainly Nelson Mandela did talk a lot about non-racialism after he was elected. The Rainbow Nation ideal is still there, and actually I bought into that, and in a way I still do buy into that. But you'll find that the purveyors of the eternal apartheid, the custodians of the eternal apartheid, if you resort to non-racialism, they will call you out on that because they have to make everything about race. So, and that is the only way really to keep the system in homeostasis and to keep the existing elites in power. If there was non-racialism in South Africa, I don't think we would have, we'd actually be able to have the kind of conversations that move us to solutions to practical problems. And so, yeah, non-racialism is a dangerous idea for people in power. They can't survive in politics without race. And I think a lot of people in the media can't survive without race either, like a guy like Eusebius Makaiser, for instance. If you take away that dude's ability to race hustle, no one's going to listen to a damn thing he says. And that's really part of the problem.
I don't know. I think that especially recent weeks now with COVID and the lockdown, I think that more and more people are seeing how the media is behaving. The media is being called out on its racist tendencies, and I've seen a lot of comments about Eusebius who people say like, oh, you're a racist, you're terrible, I hate listening to your show and stuff like that. Of course, there are the ones that do agree with him, and it would appear that the ones that agree with him are far more than the ones that don't. But again, this is all on Twitter, and Twitter is a very small drop in the population pool, so to speak. When it comes to the real world, I don't think people care about race. I really don't. And when they see the media perpetuating that, most people will go like, oh man, they roll their eyes and like, really guys, this is not what we want to talk about. But the issue as well, I guess, and this is where the media is trying to control, is the voters, the whatever little voters the ANC has left. Those are the ones that they are targeting to make sure that they fall in line, so to speak. I don't know if you would agree with that.
Yeah, I think probably. I mean, I am very skeptical about the sort of the nexus between the state and the media, because in my mind, a lot of people in positions of power in the media derive their power from ideological proximity to people in the state. So an interesting thing about the South African media, people always say, yeah, you're talking shit. The media is not biased. Look how they go after Zuma. Look how they go after all these corrupt people in the ANC. And that's fair. A lot of great stories. I think it was Paulie van Wyk, for instance, who found the VBS scandal. And so they've targeted specific politicians for corruption. But what they don't do is self-reflect on how they perpetuate the dominant ideology of South Africa. So no one in the media is having a conversation about the way we're having conversations, just like you and I are doing now. And I think that's part of the problem. So on one hand, they go after political corrupt individuals and maybe incompetent individuals. On the other hand, they act like ideological inquisitors for the dominant ideology because of the fact that the states and the media are ideologically proximal to one another. So that's a very difficult mess to untangle, I think. Yeah. And that's why I think alternative media is super important.
Absolutely. And also, you're right. We've seen how they've silenced some of the doctors and silenced other journalists, freelance journalists. They've attacked and stuff like that. So yeah, it's very interesting times in South Africa. But again, those are the things that hopefully people see, and and people will second or at least start to question things. What I've noticed in doing my research is, and I think this might be the other side of, not the other side of the coin, but we say like, oh yeah, the racist, the media is hell bent on, promoting this whole racist agenda or whatever. But from what I've seen on social media and especially on YouTube, if you go to any of their videos and their library, so like ENCA and SABC and all those, and you go into their library, the video uploads, you can see that the racist or the videos that have a racist narrative have the most views. So it is clickbait. It is a selling point for them. And some would argue, yeah, well, nowadays, they can't sell newspapers, they can't sell this, they can't sell that. So they get their income from all these views and all that stuff. What do you say to that? I mean, that's almost like, in my opinion, it's almost like selling your soul, to be honest.
Yeah, I would agree with you 100%. And again, that's the problem. Like they're not able to have a conversation about the way they have conversations because they're incentivized either through, the financial gain or from, let's be honest, a lot of politically connected people have shares in media houses in South Africa. That's pretty much a fact. I think Ramon did a video on that a couple of weeks ago. So yeah, the fact that they're incentivized to do that means that it will perpetuate until they're no longer incentivized to do so. The same thing is with like the very racist and very inflammatory political rhetoric of someone like Julius Malema. He's incentivized to do it. When he does it, the media jumps on it, and then this whole monster is created. And I would say that he's popular not in spite of the fact that he's a racist, but it's because of the fact that he's a racist. So yeah, this just goes to show how deeply entrenched these kind of memes and this ideology is in South African society, and it's really sad.
Yeah,
it breaks my heart, and that's the real reason why I still care and I still write about it and I still try to unpick these things, because I don't want the country that I was born in, grew up in, and actually want to return to someday to fall apart because we couldn't have more mature conversations about the type of future that we would like to build. And that motivates me to want to make a bit of a difference. And I think that when a person feels that way, one should just try to embody what you would hope to see. It sounds so corny to say be the change you want to see in the world, but that's it, man.
Yeah.
If you don't like racism, just be a cool person and just try to get along with everyone and know everyone. I thought that was the solution, but apparently that makes me alt-right or something, man.
Oh, well, they'll always find a way to label the good guys and bring them down. Look, I agree with you 100%. It's not a secret. I wasn't born here. I was born in Texas. I lived there for a few years. I moved to Egypt, then I moved here. I've been here for 13 years in South Africa, Cape Town specifically. I've been to Joburg and I've been to Durban. I fell in love with South Africa. I really did. Cape Town especially. I kid you not, I've been around. I'm not boasting here. I'm just saying. I've been to England. I've been to Italy. I've been to other parts of the world. Traveled America as well. Cape Town is it is the most beautiful city I've ever been to.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And I've been to a lot of cities. And I love this country. People always make fun of me as an American, like, oh, you're probably like really patriotic about your country, right? Like you probably like USA. Yeah, I am. But I am just as patriotic. That same patriotism that I have within me about America, I feel the same way about South Africa. I really do.
It's a beautiful thing, man.
Exactly. I have the paper to prove it. I have both passports. I am South African. And that's why I started making these videos, and I started like helping guys like Ramon and Big Daddy Liberty and Ronaldo to get their message out, guys like you as well, to get your message out and tell, like, just if it reaches the right people, I feel like we've made a difference. And we're people who, like, we say, like, look, we don't care about what race you are, whether you're colored, you're black, you're Indian, white. We're all South African. We are South African. Why are we having these debates like we're in the 50s or the 60s or the 80s all over again. We've gone through these fights. We're supposed to rise above them, and using history as a weapon and using racism as a weapon is not going to help us. It's if anything, it's going to keep us stagnant. And
Yeah,
and again, like Big Daddy Liberty said not too long in his vlog, the elites, the politics specifically, they do this on purpose, because while we're busy fighting about who's black and who's white and entitled this and entitled that, they're busy looting the country. And
yeah,
before
absolutely.
we know it, we're in the gutter, all of us. And anyway, I just wanted to say that I agree with you. Sorry. Um, I do want to touch on. Let's see. I'm probably gonna. I just want to say thank you to everyone who's watching. I see you, Rob Hutchinson, Beth Symes, Chico Muniz, Polly Sevenfire, Jade Mazdorp. I hope I'm pronouncing that right.
Some
Banting,
familiar names. Hey, everyone.
yeah, Banting with Eliza Cruzbura. I think I don't know what that is. That's a different language. Sorry. But yeah, thank you all so much for tuning in. I do want to address, or at least talk about, some of the comments that have come in. Uh, Let me actually do this one. Cantango Matt says, I urge you to consider Voltaire's maxim, those who, in quotation now, quote, open quote, those who can make you believe absurdity,
Atrocities.
yeah, atrocities,
Absurdities.
absurdities,
Huh?
can make
Yeah.
you commit atrocities. QF. Is he talking about you, QF? Because
But yeah, actually, I wrote that. I ended off my last article called Germ, Helen Ziller, and the Grand Ideological Inquisition with that quote from Voltaire. And it's so applicable to our conversation and to this idea of the eternal apartheid, indeed. And they're making us believe this absurdity that black and white interests are diametrically opposed, and they're using that to help or to sort of manufacture consent for the atrocity that could be communism and socialism. That redistributive ethic that the perpetually victimized African feels like if they embody that, they are not justified in punishing people
yeah,
for being victimized.
yeah,
That's part of the whole myth.
I see. And then we have, he also says, Matt says, a generation has been raised by parents who hate white people. The result is a desire of revenge and blatant racism towards whites. I agree to a certain extent with that. Yes, there are the groups that they just recycle that same hate over and over and over. But I think a large part of it, which people don't realize, is correct me if I'm wrong. From what I understand, is the government has kind of kept people in poverty and feeds them lies and blames. Oh, apartheid is the problem. This is why you're here, is because
Yeah,
apartheid put you here. And because it's maybe a new generation who don't, maybe some of them don't have parents to tell them otherwise. They believe what they see, this man with a lot of money and power. Oh man, it is the white man. Yeah, da, da. So like I agree. Yes, some parents do spread the hate, but a lot of it is the government as well. I think
sure.
I think the main blame can be on the government. I don't know if you disagree with that.
No, I agree with you 100%, man. And like the government is only able to do that because people enable them to do that.
Yeah.
And actually, I think that's what people are finding out during the lockdown, with all the legal challenges. And I see Rob Hutchinson was in the chat, and I'm sure it's Rob from DRSA. So shout out to you, man. You did great work. Um, people have realized the government will do whatever we let them get away with.
Yes.
And I'm not gonna sit here and say like I think racism is dead in South Africa. No, that's not the point of this discussion. And it does start in the home for sure. But something very interesting, happens when you go to school and when you meet people of different races, and when you actually have to work together, when you have to play sports together. That cooperation between individuals from different backgrounds builds close ties with them. And I think that you really cannot be a racist if you've had good experiences and good interactions with people of different races. Like it's almost like a vaccine against it. And I do feel like the more we're able to cooperate and the more we feel like we're cooperating, the closer social bonds will start forming. And perhaps the idea of South African nationality will transcend all the tribal, racial, ethnic differences. And that was the hope of the Rainbow Nation.
Yes.
So that was my experience. My parents grew up during apartheid. It was all they knew. When I was a kid, my parents weren't woke,
Yeah.
just to be frank about
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
But I learned from, I was the first generation who went to schools that were not segregated. Everyone was from different places, and I met people. And like when that happens, when your culture comes in contact with someone from another culture, there's always like these questions, like, why do you do things some way? Why do you do it this way? And you learn through being open and speaking to other people. And that process is called schismogenesis, when cultures collide and they sort of interact and start forming new norms and stuff like that. But that process has been arrested because of the eternal apartheid. And I want to give people like a conceptual framework to understand that when they see it, and then try to move above it by actually going back to telling stories of, hey, actually, I cooperate with people pretty well and we work together to the same goal. And you know what I think is so great? Sorry, I'm now like
No, go
ranting
ahead.
here.
Go ahead.
But fucking rugby, dude. Rugby in South Africa is like, but bro, like if you look at the last World Cup and you look at the diversity of the team, and you look at South Africa is not a rich country. It doesn't have the sort of sports infrastructure that I see here in Europe. The grassroots kind of stuff, that these kids have is amazing. It's a wonder why these countries don't monopolize and dominate everything, like sports-wise, But the South African rugby team, all those different people from all their different backgrounds, hard as fuck, people that have been through struggle and had to be tenacious to achieve something, could dominate the world in one of the world's most gladiatorial sports, and that tells me something about that South Africans are made of strong stuff.
Yeah.
And if we can catalyze and sort of join along those lines, I really think South Africa has amazing potential.
Absolutely. I agree with you. But you bring up rugby, right? So look at what happened when we won the World Cup recently. Like, everyone just put down their weapons, so to speak,
Yeah.
We were all... It's amazing how that sport can really break down our differences. And forever how short, whether it was an hour after we won or like 24 hours after we won, everybody was happy. Everybody was proud to be South African. You really felt that patriotic South African, but it didn't take long for that to just go away. It just...
didn't the race hustlers come out immediately and say like, you must go get... Siya Kolisi must go get his congratulations from Prince William or some shit like that.
Yes, that's pretty much when it started again, and he then they started attacking his wife because she's white. I mean that was around at that time as well, and again it's all these people, I think that you call them the social justice warriors or the keyboard warriors or whatever you want to call them. They just have nothing better to do with their lives, and another good example is what happened to Bianca with the the queen, not the queen,
Miss Universe type of thing.
Yeah. I mean,
South
again,
Africa, whatever.
Going back into her history and like, oh, look at this tweet she put out, like however long ago, and bringing race back into it, and they just won't stop. But yeah, going back to the rugby thing that I wanted to say is I wish we could remember those moments as South Africans and just stay with that moment, and remember that together we are united, together we are strong, and that it doesn't matter what these idiots that are in power say. And you can try and report me, whoever's watching and doesn't like that I called whoever idiots. You can try and take me to jail. These idiots that are in power, this is what they want to do. They're happy. Yeah, sure, we won the Rugby World Cup. You had Cyril holding the trophy, like, yeah, proud moment. But then they very quickly want to stifle it. They're like, okay, cool, you had your little 5 minutes of happiness. Now we're going to break it down. Remember, you are our subjects, and you must fight against each other. It's very frustrating. I had another question. Well, I'll look at some of the comments here that are coming in. Jade is telling me how to pronounce her name. She says, "No, Joe, It's I'm still going to pronounce it incorrectly.
Maasdorp.
Oh, okay, there you go. Thank you, Maasdorp. I probably still butchered it. And let's see here. We've got, yeah, so Kantango also agrees. A large part of the blame is also the government, yes. So you see, there are people that agree. It's just that our fight must continue, man. Like I feel like we just have to keep on putting it in people's faces and saying, "Hey guys, wake up! This is what's happening. This is what's happening around you." You know. And a lot of people, like, what irritates me sometimes is I see this and no one's done it to me yet, but I know it's coming. With these videos that I make, they'll be like, some of them might say like, "Oh yeah, well, easy for you to say because you stay in a house and you have money and you have this, and it's easy for you to like be critical, but like you're not in those shoes and you don't understand what it's like to be poor and blah blah blah." And again, it's not my fault that they are in that situation. I'm trying to tell you that your anger that you're pushing onto me is actually supposed to be directed at the people that you're supposed to vote for, the politicians.
Absolutely.
That's who
Yeah.
you're supposed to be angry with. I make a video because I want to open people's minds and make them ask questions about what's happening around them. That's why I do this stuff. Don't be angry with me. Don't shoot the messenger. I'm presenting facts in front of you. You know, why don't you start asking Cyril, who recently said, "Oh, this economy is what's it? Colonialism, colonialist, and racism and racist." Sorry, I mean, what a hypocritical thing to say because he's made billions off of this economy.
Yeah.
It's insane. But anyway, Jade saying, "There we go, Q." So anyway, I did want to ask you an interesting question because you did this whole article about South Africa and the eternal apartheid, and right now in America we have something just crazy happening with this whole Antifa thing and this George Floyd and the riots left, right, and center, people losing their homes, their businesses. There are some deaths, a lot of deaths happening. It's really sad to see, terrible to see. Now, obviously, America is not exactly in the same boat as South Africa, but would you say that there's a similar thing happening, just under a different banner?
Yeah, I think there are some parallels between the historical struggles, the historical racial struggles in the U.S. Versus South Africa. I mean, slavery and the genocide of Native Americans in the U.S. In South Africa, there was a genocide called the Mfokane, where the Zulus displaced many tribes. But I mean, the racial history of apartheid and stuff is well known. So I suppose those tensions are similar between the two societies. But I also think there's a problem with the conversation in the US. You know, I mean, I'm not an expert on this kind of thing, right? But like, as far as I remember, Martin Luther King was a non-racialist, and he was the kind of guy who said, wasn't he the guy who said we should judge people not by the color of their skin,
Yes.
but by the content of their character, right? That was MLK. And it seems also in the US, and it's gotten worse since Trump was elected. We can talk about Trump is a bad guy, good guy, whatever. I'm not really interested in that. But the conversations about race in the US, I think they have been unhelpful to some degree, which is, it's not to say that like you shouldn't talk about real racism when it does appear, but it seems like sometimes they talk about racism when it's not even there. You know, like going back to stupid examples like Jimmy Fallon did like he dressed up like Chris Rock or something like that, you know?
Yes.
And there was this whole, so the conversation has proceeded in the US in a very stereotyped way, and it's caused a lot of angst and anxiety among people. And I think on top of COVID, and now you start seeing, stuff sort of fraying at the seams. But what the US has that South Africa doesn't have is it has this sort of supra-cultural identity. Like you can go into the US and be an American. So no matter where you come from, at some point, if you identify with being an American and you're patriotic and you love freedom and liberty, you will find a family no matter what race and what color and stuff you are. But I mean, this is now a whole other story, but like certain voices in the media, certain people in academia have really run with this. And you guys should go and follow this dude called James Lindsay, Conceptual James, on Twitter. He breaks down the theoretical underpinnings of the type of philosophy which is used to critique race. And actually, I retweeted a thread of his today about critical race theory. So these discourses have found their way into mainstream media, found their way into academia, have really sort of added tension to the race debate. So we've moved from non-racialism to now you have to talk about race all the time.
Yeah.
And it's not saying that there might not be problems in the police force with abuse of power, and racial dynamics are not great in terms of police and communities and stuff like that. I'm not denying this. But they framed the conversation in such an unhelpful way for so long, and now shit's hit the fan. And I think it's a direct consequence of this. And, I've observed something like the media in the US over the last couple of years has been all about like this threat of rising white nationalism, presumably because a small minority of Trump's base might be white nationalists, probably, Charlottesville, whatever. But look who's causing the chaos now. It's the radical left Antifa. And the media has kind of cloaked this sort of discourse
very badly.
Very badly. And now it's all come to the fore. We were like looking over here going, okay, we're really worried about the fucking white supremacists because they're going to cause some shit. And now the radical left anarcho-communists from Antifa have hijacked the protests and have caused a lot of chaos. Anyone who was really paying attention could have seen that coming. But the media was busy diverting our attention in one direction because Orange Man bad. Come on.
Yeah, Trump is always an interesting topic for some people. I will reserve my opinion on that because that's going to open up a whole nother can of worms if we were to go into that. So Chico, I see you with your comment. I will put it up on the screen, and I'm not going to say anything else, but I'll read it for Quentin. He says, Trump was a bad idea to start with. Popularity shouldn't be a metric for running the country. So yes, there is that. You're right. There is this narrative again that has kind of gone into the States, and it's always that, especially when it comes to a cop who kills or allegedly kills a black man. That's always big news in America. I mean, like it's not the first time it's happened, and we'll see how that case develops and all that. Regardless, it's a terrible thing that happened. Someone lost their life. It's not
I agree with
cool.
you, yeah.
But does that mean, and this is how they justify it, they're like, this isn't the first time, it's happened before, the justice system isn't doing anything, blah, 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 and then they go out and they have a riot. Now, here's an interesting thing, right? And I think Big Daddy Liberty also touched on this. And I also noticed this as well. So social media exploded when this happened, right? That Black Lives Matter came back in like full force, right? But that same passion wasn't there with what's his name?
Here in Collins Kosa. Well,
yes, that one. Yeah. Sorry, Collins Kosa. The same amount of anger and passion was not there.
No,
it wasn't. And Big Daddy Liberty did say or theorized that the reason why is because it wasn't a white man who killed him. It's kind of the same situation. You have an authority in police or army who killed a black man, but that story wasn't big news because it wasn't a white man in authority that killed him. And this is the double standard. This is the sad truth. And they'll argue, they'll say like, oh yeah, but Collins was recently over the weekend he was trending. Yeah, it's too late now, man. It's like 3 weeks.
Oh, exactly.
3 weeks later. It's actually a bad thing that he's only trending now. But I encourage people to go watch Big Daddy Liberty. He explains a lot more detail about that. But just to show almost the hypocrisy in some cases, and how, again, this movement that is happening to divert us from the truth, as you said, we're looking here, but this is all happening. And what is your opinion on Antifa? Do you think what Trump said about making them a terrorist organization, do you agree with that or do you not agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I don't know how centralized. I don't know that much about them, but I don't know how centralized they are, like in terms of someone issuing commands and some people go ahead and do stuff. And my understanding is they're kind of this sort of loose connection of anarchists, and yeah, maybe one guy might run a local chapter, but there's no real coordination between bigger sort of cells, let's say, whatever, I don't know, the terrorist nomenclature. So yeah, I mean, maybe it's just rhetoric to designate them as such. I do think you have to kind of identify the enemy, and sort of that's your first point. First way to start attacking them is to identify them and sort of try to find out, what shared beliefs they have and what are they fighting for, in order to, beef up the intelligence around that kind of stuff. I have no problem with that. I mean, I think if you're attacking people's businesses, especially now, I mean, anytime it's bad, but after or during the coronavirus crisis, when businesses aren't trading and now you're going and fucking with people's livelihoods, it's really disgusting. And anyone who's doing that is a domestic terrorist, in my opinion. I mean,
Yeah.
finished and klaar.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you 100%. Do yourself a favor, do go research a bit more about Antifa. That whole organization is interesting, especially when you start to learn what they stand for, and yet they do the exact opposite. So, having said that, we're almost out of time, but there's time for a few more questions. I did want to ask you about. Oh yes, so you mentioned Marx earlier, and you mentioned communism and stuff like that. What is your opinion on that? Do you think, because obviously South Africa now is, a lot of people will say like, no, it's not really happening. We're not communists. We're not doing that. This is like a whole new idea. We're doing it differently. What do you say to people who say that?
I say, first of all, you don't understand history, and I sympathize, because like I said, I was very attracted to Marxist ideas in university. In fact, when I was in my master's, I did a psychobiography on Che Guevara. So I studied his life and kind of did like a psychological analysis of that for one of my projects. So believe me, I know what it is about Marxism that's seductive, especially to young people. However, when you look at those ideas and you apply them, they fail for a number of reasons. First of all, the economy is so complicated that you can never have state control over the whole thing. It only ends up in shortages. It only ends up in starvation. Just go look at what the Great Leap Forward in China did. I mean, I think it's something like 60 million people starved, and the Soviet Union was even worse. At the beginning of last year, I read the Gulag Archipelago, and man, that will put you off those kind of ideas in practice. And that's a scary thing, like utopian ideas like that sound so good. And you think, yeah, of course, you would want to redistribute wealth and raise people's living standards. But in fact, now I live in the most capitalist country probably ever. Maybe not the most capitalist, but certainly the Dutch invented capitalism, right? And let me tell you, man, the middle class here is the majority of the population. And in global terms and in European terms, it seems like they're pretty wealthy. And you can basically take any job and make a decent living, And that's the beauty of a free market. Goods and services get to people at the right prices. Business does its thing. Of course, the government controls businesses in some ways. There's taxation, there's environmental regulations, and those things are good. But there's no way you can centrally plan an economy. It's way too complicated. And worse than that, economic activity forms its own emergent order, right? So it is a bottom-up system. So here was the big problem with Marx and socialism. So in Marxist theory, socialism is a transitional state on the way to communism, right? So you need to have what he called the dictatorship of the proletariat and form a government based on that. And that would be a socialist government. And that government will slowly own all the means of production and control all the resources. And at some point, once everything is sort of shared and equal, the state will fall away. And then you've got communism. When everything is communally owned and controlled, there's no need for a government. And that would be the end of history, according to Marx. But what you always find is that, okay, you form the state, and they call themselves the dictatorship of the proletariat, but they're just the dictatorship of whoever's in power. And every time it happens in that way. And that's because Marx was maybe an interesting dude to read in terms of critique on ideology, especially actually in his critique of ideology, but in terms of his understanding of human nature and what drives human economics from a bottom-up level, he's wrong. And in fact, sorry, now you got me going, bro. I actually refuse now to use the term capitalism, because capitalism is a Marxist phrase. And that was Marx's critique of the economy. He called it capitalism, meaning that people who own things, who have capital, are the ones who skim all the wealth off the top. I will now only refer to free market economics, because I think that accurately describes what I agree with, which is, the ability for individuals, companies, businesses to make whatever mutually agreed upon transactions they could make with minimal government interference. And when there should be government interference, it should be to prevent sort of environmental issues, to protect some consumer rights, and maybe to protect against big monopolies and sort of the winner takes all effect, which can be a problem in free market economics. But yeah, exactly. But to institute socialism only ends in tears, and you only have to look throughout history to see the examples of that. And then you want to look at well-run, wealthy countries. They're all free market economies. So the proof is there in the pudding. Yeah, yeah. It wasn't real communism. That's the old line. Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely correct. And actually, you know what? I would, seeing as we're ending, I hope you'll join me again. I would love to actually have
Whenever you like, bro.
I would love to have a conversation, maybe a show based on socialism, and a more in-depth conversation of socialism versus free market, as you call it, rather than capitalism. I don't think capitalism. I will disagree with you on this. I had a conversation with a man, which you guys can also, for those of you watching, can go back into my playlist. Let's talk, and you'll see. I did a show once on, the topic was capitalism is a swear word, and we discussed the word capitalist, and yes, for some South Africans that word does sting. It does, like, you know. But I think he made a good defense on why it isn't. It shouldn't be regarded as a swear word. That's the media that's made it this way, and stuff like that. I understand where you're coming from, though, being, researching about Marx and stuff. That sounds interesting. So that's really what I would like to talk to you about, maybe in the upcoming show.
Sure.
I think that will be a very interesting topic to have, and I can see people are saying we want more. So
we could go on as long as you need to, bro.
Hey guys, sorry I'm late. Was working. Conscious Caracal, there he is. Thank you, man, for blessing us with your presence in the final moments.
Better late than never, bro.
Dude, Conscious Caracal, while you're watching, do know that I've linked your interview with Quentin in the description below. Please, guys, go check Conscious Caracal out. He has a lot of interesting topics that he talks about on his channel, as well as videos. And great guy, Conscious Caracal. Here's my invite. If you want to come onto my show, onto this show, I'd be more than happy to have you. But yeah, Quentin, I like to keep it to an hour because I don't want to,
people's attention spans.
Yeah, people's attention spans. But this has been a very, very, very nice conversation, and I will definitely have you back to talk about Marxism and all that stuff. I think that's something that does need to be spoken about, especially now when we have a government that's, as you just mentioned, the whole centralizing the government, making the government centralized, which is exactly what's happening. The NHI, the EWC, RET, all that stuff is the government taking control. But the difference is, and the biggest problem I think with socialism leading to communism, is that Marx didn't factor in the human element of it, that people are greedy. I think the only person that may have been able to do it right was Marx himself, but I don't know a lot about him. I don't know if he was a greedy person. Maybe he was one of the few that were really stood by by his ideologies, but humans are flawed. And yeah, so we'll go into more detail about that next time you're on the show, if you're willing to.
Anytime you like, man.
Cool. So what I usually do, Quentin, with my guests is I give them a moment to give a quick message out to the audience that are watching. If you want to say anything very quickly.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, first of all, Joe, for this opportunity to talk about some ideas, and I really enjoy it. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. Please go ahead and read the article, go and watch the video, and just in your own lives, try to take those conversations forward. When you feel like someone is sort of talking in bad faith, or when you feel like someone is coming from a point of view that the interests of black and white people are diametrically opposed, try to move the conversation back to actually what shared interests people have and what shared values people have. And I think we might have to really start trying to understand our history and South African history a lot better to really see that it wasn't always this case of friction between groups. There were occasions when people cooperated, and maybe we need to learn more from what they were able to achieve in those ways, and that might give us some kind of hint to go forward. So yeah, thanks for everything, Joe, and peace.
Cool. Hang on to the line just for a moment, Quentin. I'll give you a proper goodbye in just a moment. So, guys, that was Quentin Ferreira. Oh, man, I suck at pronouncing names. But thank you all so much for tuning in. Conscious Caracal, even though you were late, thank you so much. Jade, thank you so much. I'm so glad you enjoyed it. Polly Seven Fire, you are awesome. Thank you so much for tuning in, as well as Cantango, Matt, and everyone else that tuned in. Thank you guys so much. Please don't forget to like this video. Please subscribe to my channel. I have interesting conversations coming up with interesting people. I also interview comedians, local comedians in South Africa. We have a lot of fun with you guys when we play games. But I will also be interviewing this week Cape Independence. Philip Craig from Cape Independence is going to be on my show later on this week, I think on Thursday. On Wednesday, I do a weekly talk with a fellow comedian. So it's comedians talking about the news. Sometimes it's fun, sometimes it's serious. And yeah, a whole lot more other content coming your way, ladies and gentlemen. Tomorrow I'll be interviewing a comedian, and we'll be having a lot of fun. It's called My Sit Down and Lockdown Show with Glenn Bowe. So all this can be found on my YouTube channel, so please go check it out. So there's other videos for you guys to also enjoy. So once again, thank you, Quentin, and thank you everyone who tuned in. Please stay safe, and I'll catch you at the next one.